G'day folks, Scott here. Here's my second review for Star Wars The Last Jedi. This is my full spoilers discussion, so if you don't want to know anything about this movie, watch my spoiler-free one and come back and watch this after you've seen the movie. So I saw the movie for the second time last night, and I found I enjoyed it probably more than I did the first because I guess I'd lost my expectations and the things that had irked me about it didn't seem quite as bad as they did the first time, but I still have some major issues with it. So I'll just kind of run through my thoughts on it as they sort of come to me. First off the bat, I love the opening. The whole opening battle sequence with, Poe taking out all the turrets on the big dreadnought ship and his plan and all that kind of stuff. I really liked all that. I've had a few friends, and I agree, who are a bit sketchy about the humor behind the prank call he did with Hux, on the bridge of the Star Destroyer. I guess for me that sits a little too close to home from a humor perspective because they feel like Earth jokes, calling someone and pranking them and, going on the hold thing. It was a pretty interesting moment, as far as the entire battle went, but yeah, the humor there, I guess, is a little too close to home for me. But I loved Hux, Hux and that whole thing, him, kind of screwing up and then obviously getting completely just spanked by Snoke afterwards. I really enjoyed that, when Snoke sort of, had a go at him afterwards and Hux was like, oh, I'll take the call in my room, like a defiant child. And, Snoke just showed up and force pushed him around and whatever. And that was really cool. I liked all the new bombers instead of the wire wings. I liked how they all got taken out. The calamity from that TIE fighter bouncing in amongst them as it blew up and doing all this extraordinary amount of damage. The sacrifice of, who would be Rose's sister, to destroy the dreadnought. That whole sequence was great. And what I loved about it was when Leia really chastised and demoted Poe Dameron for it later on. That gave him what was one of the most interesting character arcs in the movie. I love that Poe, Leia's character was really pushing him to move from just being this, smart-ass flyboy, as they called him, gun-happy guy, and trying to turn him into a leader. And that was cool. It was really interesting. The effects throughout all that were really good. It was a cool sequence. I liked the escape, I enjoyed that element to it, the sort of chase sequence element to this movie, how they were being traced, although, the explanations behind the tracker and all that get a little hokey in the sort of third act of the movie. But the concept of them being pursued constantly and every time they jump, they're, 30 minutes behind them, and that sort of tension that arose from that leading to the chase later on is a really cool concept. Finn waking up was fine, and then obviously he, asked where Rey is, and then we cut to Rey, seeing Luke, from the end of The Force Awakens. What I did like about that is that scene, and obviously that point of, a discussion point for the fans after the end of The Force Awakens with her just, holding the lightsaber out and him, just sort of giving her that funny look and that long, drawn-out thing between them. I love how that tension was immediately broken by him just lobbing the saber over his shoulder and, not giving a shit and just walking off, I thought they handled that as well as they could have. I think, had they have done anything else, no conversation would have hit what people had built in their minds for that moment, and I thought that was really smart. I liked that Luke, even in a short amount of time, had gone kind of crazy and, had really withdrawn himself and all that. That for me, everything that happened on that island mimicked, Yoda's planet Dagobah in Empire Strikes Back. But I really enjoyed that. I liked the dynamic between Luke and Rey. I liked Chewie kicking his door in and telling him off, and that led to one of the greatest moments in the movie for me, actually, was when Luke went onto the Falcon when Chewie was having his funny thing about eating porgs and the porgs all pulling their cute faces. And, Luke going onto there and going into the cockpit for the Falcon and grabbing the dice and then sitting near the chess table. R2 waking up, that scene between them was one of the most beautiful moments in the movie for me. I absolutely adored that. That was just such a great moment, and that was one of the few times the nostalgia for me 100% worked and didn't seem derivative. It was a really great emotional scene. Luke and R2 had an incredible relationship together, and R2 pulling the heartstrings and playing the original Leia hologram and all that, that whole thing was fantastic. But that's sort of obviously going ahead in the movie. I like that Kylo Ren is in the shit with Snoke. I loved Snoke's throne room, obviously having a throne room for this supreme leader who's basically a Sith master, just like the Emperor was. It was, I guess, important for them to make it look different to the Emperor's throne room, but to still be reminiscent of it. I love the red background. I love that this time the Red Guards were all sort of different, and they did something. You know, if you remember Return of the Jedi, the Red Guards basically ushered someone out of an elevator and stood around a bit, and that was about all they did in it. Snoke looked great. Obviously, we'll get to, you know, what happened with Snoke later on. I liked all that, you know, I liked that he berated Kylo Ren. I liked that when Hux was getting congratulated by Snoke after being, you know, sort of told off by him for, you know, the way that he pursued the rebels and the resistance and you know, tracked their ship. I liked that cheeky grin he gave Kylo Ren on the way out as they passed, you know, giving him shit, because there's always been that sort of tension between them in the last movie. So I liked that. Hux was great in this. Like, I really like that character. I like how he's kind of unhinged and is a little crazy, and he didn't go full Hitler like he did in the last one, but I really do enjoy him when he's on screen, and I like the tension between those two. I like that really the only like full-on tantrum Kylo Ren had in this that was reminiscent of the way he was in The Force Awakens was obviously after that confrontation with Snoke, and after Snoke sort of really berated him and told him to take that childish mask off and said he'd never be Vader, and basically just shat all over him for the events of the previous movie. You know, I liked him smashing his mask in the elevator, and sort of, you know, that was a very defining moment for him. Obviously, that leads to the chase where, you know, he's then got in his new sort of spaceship, TIE fighter, cross Darth Maul's kind of ship, you know, hybrid thing that he has, and then pursuing the Resistance more. Obviously, there was that battle there, and, you know, they're still trying to escape, and that led to, you know, a very pivotal moment in the movie with him making this decision about, you know, taking out his mother, Princess Leia, or General Leia, on the bridge of that ship. You know, him resisting it, being conflicted, not doing it, and then the two, you know, wingmen doing it for him. I love that going in. I love that whole moment while it lasted. You know, I liked how he did that barrel roll when he was coming in over the top of their ship and got in that hangar bay and went up the runway thing and took out all of the ships like they were still on the hangar before they're taken out. Like, that was all super cool. Obviously, the entire bridge getting blown up, and Leia and, you know, Admiral Akbar and whatnot all getting like blown out into space and, you know, consequently dying. At that moment, not having ever seen a single trailer for this movie, I actually considered the fact that that might have been it for Leia, and I honestly thought that, oh my god, they've actually come up with a really cool way to write her out, given the fact that poor Carrie Fisher died in the production of the movie. So I didn't know she was going to come back in it. So I was like, damn, that's really cool. Like, it's actually a great death. That shot where it came back on her and she was like frozen in space in a, you know, position and whatnot, I was like, this is perfect. Like, it's a great send-off for her. And then, of course, it wasn't. You know, she was alive, and the Force, I guess, you know, saved her. Whether or not she was conscious, you know, her eyes did open, but it seemed all very automated. Now, that stuff happened in Star Wars Rebels as well, so I guess it's been, you know, pushed as Star Wars canon, even though most of you probably haven't seen Star Wars Rebels and the reference might not be known to you. I didn't dig that, you know, like, I thought, in the grand scheme of things, obviously now having seen the whole movie, I understand why they couldn't do that, and she'd shot so many more scenes for it, and some really nice scenes later on in the movie. But from a story point of view, and for, you know, whatever they're going to do to try and deal with that for episode 9, that would have been a great death. I would have been really satisfied with that if that's the way it had panned out. You know, so her coming back and doing the thing, I've heard a few people refer that to as a Mary Poppins sequence, which I kind of get. You know, not a huge fan. Now, I liked the power play on the Rebel ship after that with, you know, Laura Dern's new sort of resistance leader whom we've never seen before, taking control of the ship, and Poe Dameron, you know, being, so like, as we said earlier, demoted. I like that tension between those two, although I found her out of place. My problem is a little bit with these Star Wars movies is putting in established actors draws me out of it when I see someone I know from something else. Like, I like the idea of them using more unknowns because it makes it easier for me, you know, to just be absorbed in the story without being drawn out from it. So as soon as I'm looking at her going, dude, is that the chick from Jurassic Park? Like, that was just a thing. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of celebrities in Star Wars films, but whatever. Didn't like her heaps, but, you know, get back to her. So overall, like, I found the training with Luke and Rey on that island, I really enjoyed all of that, you know. It was definitely reminiscent of Luke and Yoda. I liked his reluctance to do it. I liked how they revealed the backstory between him and the Jedi's temple he'd created and the students he'd taken and what happened with Ben, and that kind of thing. And I liked how the story being told in two different elements. Obviously with, Kylo Ren appearing to Rey and her appearing to him, but just as their physical bodies, not seeing the backgrounds or where they were or anything. I thought that was a cool touch. I really liked all those scenes between them. Overall, I thought Kylo Ren was much better in this movie. Like I said earlier, he was a little more measured, although he was still conflicted and still angry and still carried on a lot. It didn't have that sort of bratty qualities like the previous one did. He definitely matured. I liked how the scar from the previous battle was being, attended to by droids and got repaired throughout the movie. Like, that was cool. Like during this time, obviously Finn, has woken up from his injuries from the previous one. We've, had all this trouble happen to them during, the Kylo Ren attack and all that kind of stuff. And Finn's decided to run away again and to, go and try and find Rey so he can keep her away from all this because he wants to look after his friend. During this, he meets Rose, whose sister died on the last bomber, blowing up that dreadnought at the beginning of the movie. And they have their whole story thing that goes on from there, and that is probably my biggest issue with the movie, is that storyline. Everything else, I was really thoroughly enjoying. I liked the concept of them having to get on board the lead Star Destroyer, that the tracker was there, that if they can sneak on board that thing and deactivate it, then it lets them do that one jump to get away. I love the whole tension of that sequence with a rebel ship just outside of range of the Imperial ships to do any serious damage, but them just constantly bombarding the shields with those blasts. That was cool. Obviously the other ships running out of fuel and getting blown up, adding tension to that sequence. That whole thing was good, and that was something that had never really been done in a Star Wars movie before, which is good because too many of moments in episode 7 and 8 I find very reminiscent of moments that I've had in episodes, specifically 4, 5, and 6. So I was totally down with that. The problem is the story they created to get them onto that Star Destroyer to do this was just unnecessarily long and overdrawn, I wasn't a huge fan of Mars, in the Force Awakens, and I was glad, that character had such a small role in this. In fact, it was kind of, cool that the communication took place over a hologram and whatever. But, this code breaker guy, that's where it just really got out of control for me. That whole planet they went to, Rose and Finn, to go and get this code breaker who could get them onto this ship and, deactivate this tracker that they needed to do, I really found that just jarringly out of place to the tone and the rest of the movie. In the grand scheme of things, if you rush forward to the end of the movie, I know that they really would have put this in as a way to develop character between Rose, obviously so we can get to know her and specifically develop that relationship between her and Finn. I get why they did it. It just didn't really work for me. Every time it went back to there, and obviously all those scenes where they were off on that planet were intersected with other vast action pieces or things that were going on that I was actually very invested in and interested in. Every time it came back to that, I was like, oh God, just get on with it, So I didn't like the casino world, the rich city thing. I liked the underlying thing and Rose's issue with it, with the fact that this money all came from war and they were supporting the military complex and all that. I'm cool with all that because, obviously the prequel trilogy was very politically driven as well. I just found the casino itself kind of stupid, I found, and I get this, Star Wars is supposed to be for kids. I think too often people of my age and my generation and even younger than me who are diehard Star Wars fans, specifically original trilogy fans, were so dismissive of everything that comes after that because those movies were our childhood. And then people I meet who grew up during the 90s and the prequel trilogy is their childhood, they defend them, because that was what they got into. Star Wars is fundamentally a kid's franchise. These movies are made for kids. So when you're a grown man and you're getting upset because porgs are cute and, moments like the sort of cuteness of this casino and stuff, I've got to put into perspective to go, it's a kid's film, dude. What do you want, So I do keep that in mind, but my problem with the casino is, again, I guess what I said about the humor early in the movie is it reminds me too much of the world I live in, and that's not what I want from Star Wars. When they were panning through that casino, even though the games weren't games that I recognized, they were still throwing dice and doing things like we do here. The tables, although they were in different shapes, still look like tables they do in casinos here. It still had people well-dressed standing around the table cheering and doing all that kind of stuff. And if you look back to earlier Star Wars movies, I guess, in episode 4, when they go to the cantina in Mos Eisley, yes, you recognize that as a bar, but you don't recognize like the drinks or the way the drinks are displayed, and the cups are different and the fluid is different and the games they're playing at the tables are different. You don't necessarily recognize them. You're just aware of what they're doing because it's somewhat similar. Even in, Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin and, Palpatine, and there was a big scene talking about Darth Plagueis, and he was beginning the seduction of Anakin to the dark side. They were at some kind of ballet, opera, theatrical performance kind of thing, but it was so far dissociated from what we would go to the theater and see, I didn't feel it jarring to see it. But I found the casino jarring, right down to the point where there were literally teacups, just like we have, and glasses and flutes and champagne bottles with corks coming out, and all these things that are just too earth to belong for me in the Star Wars universe. I found a few of the creatures in there looked like reminiscent of Harry Potter-esque kind of designs. The brightness and the sharp lines of it and stuff reminded me more of the Fifth Element than they did of Star Wars. I really had issue with all of that. The whole horse racing things with the strange big dogs, I don't know what those things are called yet, but as soon as I saw one of them, I thought of the PlayStation 4 game, The Last Guardian. Like, I'm surprised no one in the art department at Lucasfilm was like, hang on guys, like, have you seen this game? They look pretty damn similar. That was a bit of an issue. Like, I didn't really dig any of that. The fact that they got caught, that was kind of funny. The little dwarf guy using BB-8 as a jukebox or like a pokey machine or something, pumping him full of coins and then him using those coins. That leads me to the character I disliked the most in the movie. When they were arrested, they meet Benicio del Toro's character, who's, eventually going to be their version of the Codebreaker because they couldn't get the other guy, right? And I just, again, seeing that sort of major star guy in a movie. I've already seen him in other Disney movies like The Collector and, the Guardians of the Galaxy franchise. I found it jarring to see him in there. I didn't like his character. I didn't like his attempts at humor. I didn't like his weird stuttering mumble thing that he did. The escape was kind of lame. That whole sequence really, like, apart from the fact that it was there for them to develop Rose and Finn's relationship, didn't do much for me. Obviously, I'll come back to that for the end of the movie. So they escape from that place, and then they get back to what they were supposed to be doing, is getting on that Star Destroyer. I just find it was 20 minutes. Like, that made this the longest Star Wars movie ever. And if you took that whole casino thing out of there, or at least wrote it in such a manner that it wasn't so drawn out and jarringly different to the tone of the rest of the movie, then, I think myself and a lot of other people perhaps would have, a different opinion on this. Especially because the rest of the stories were so interesting. Obviously, during this time, Luke and Rey have been doing the training thing. Again, very reminiscent of a vibe of Empire Strikes Back, like I said earlier. Even down to the fact that, Rey, when she's reaching out with the Force, just like Luke did when he was reaching out with the Force with Yoda, except he detected, obviously, the dark tree at one point, and then or the cave, underneath the tree, and he detected the trouble that his friends were going to be in when he saw the future. Rey, when pushing out with the Force, detected the dark spot that was on the island, and all that was very reminiscent. So she goes off and does that. I honestly found that sequence in Empire Strikes Back when they did that, and Luke went down into the tree, and obviously Yoda was like, don't take your weapons, you won't need them. Whatever's in there is only what you take with you, and that led to this, sort of hint of what was to come in the, with him beheading Vader and it's his face inside the mask, and that was obviously a very big hint about the revelation that was going to come later in the movie. This gave you the impression that was going to happen with this sequence with Rey, but it just never came about. She had the weird sequence with the finger clicking and the mimics with all of her and the reflections and all that. And when it came to the fact that she was like, okay, I'm finally going to find out who my parents is, and she just swiped the thing off and saw her own reflection, I guess that throws back to Luke seeing himself in Vader's mask, but that was a massive hint. This wasn't, for me, I guess, So I found that didn't go anywhere. Obviously that leads to, the big revelations with Kylo telling her that, Luke had tried to kill him, and that had led to their falling out, and then the revelation that Luke hadn't actually gone there with the intention of killing him, but had changed his mind at the last minute. The lightsaber was already drawn. Kylo Ren saw that, obviously defended himself, and everything went from there. Like, I liked all that, and I specifically liked how it went back to the shot that was established in The Force Awakens of the fire and R2 and Luke's hand going on it, which is, one of the only shots you got of Luke in that movie. Like, that was all cool. Like, I really dug all that. Obviously her then leaving the island and deciding to go and, she had a moment with Kylo Ren, which I really liked, like all those scenes together with them and how, You know, it wasn't so much him seducing her to the dark side, it was them finding a connection because they weren't connecting with anyone else at that point, and they had so much in common. Like that was a cool thread. Like I really liked that. So her rushing off and going off and doing that. You know, during that, obviously, we've still got the chase going on board the ship. There's a power play on board the ship. The whole Laura Dern thing with, you know, Poe taking command of the ship and then Leia waking up. You know, I really didn't dig at when Leia woke up. I really didn't dig it when she Mary Poppins back on the ship. But waking up, I really thought, you know, okay. So yeah, Leia comes in and Poe gets again, you know, sort of in trouble, gets stunned, gets taken off. And that's when, you know, that everyone evacuates. They go with Laura Dern's plan. You know, they're running out of fuel. Everything's getting to that sort of breaking moment. And the tension kind of, you know, was very interesting throughout all of that. And obviously during this time, we're really rushing to having Finn and Rose and the Codebreaker guys thing take place. So they finally get onto the Star Destroyer. Again, I find all of this kind of, you know, weird. We finally see this BB-9E droid thing I brought back there for the first and only time really in the movie. That leads to them getting caught in a pretty, you know, lame scene. Then we come to Captain Phasma shows up and, you know, they're going to get executed. And all this is cut between these scenes. Now, what I did love at this end of the movie was the throne room sequence with Rey being brought before Snoke. Very reminiscent of Vader bringing Luke towards the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. Obviously, that's, you know, the stuff on the island with Luke was very Empire Strikes Back for me, and the last battle scene was very Empire Strikes Back to me, but the throne room thing, of course, was very Return of the Jedi. But I really enjoyed it. I liked how that scene played out. I liked all of Snoke's dialogue. You know, I liked the fact that he had manipulated Kylo Ren and Rey both to get them both in the same room together. I would imagine that, you know, his original thing was perhaps either he was going to, you know, kill Kylo Ren and keep her as his apprentice, or use her death as sacrifice as he tried to do to get Kylo Ren to finally, you know, be 100% bad side with him. So all the tension and stuff throughout that scene, the way it all played out, of course, Kylo Ren's, you know, tricky little plan that he did to kill Snoke, I didn't see that coming. You know, when Snoke got cut in half and fell off the chair and his legs stayed there with his legs crossed and stuff, like that was super cool. Like I really liked that. You know, the ensuing battle with Rey and Kylo Ren fighting all of those Emperor's guards who were vastly, you know, cool, like with all their different weapons and stuff. That scene was fantastic. It was violent, it was cool, it was a well choreographed scene, lots of nice wide shots instead of these, you know, prequel close-ups that happened in a lot of the lightsaber combat. Very well put together, it was really cool. Obviously Kylo Ren, you know, ending that battle with the turning the lightsaber on through the guard's head and leaving the big hole and stuff, like that was all great. You know, obviously, again, I've heard a lot of people complaining about the death of Snoke in that sequence, and I feel, you know, somewhat like it was a missed opportunity because I really found Snoke engaging, and Andy Serkis did a fantastic job as him, and I would have loved to have known more about him. But if you just look at that original trilogy, you didn't know much about the Emperor, and you really didn't get that much more time with him than you got with Snoke. You didn't know about his backstory, you didn't know how he got into the condition that he was in. So it's not so unfair to hold this movie accountable for something another one didn't do either. But I just think he was so interesting, I would have liked to have seen more of him. But that whole thing was great. Obviously that led to Rey and Kylo, you know, then becoming opposite again and having a big, you know, like disagreement, and, you know, him wanting to do very Darth Vader, join me together, we'll rule the galaxy, very reminiscent of Vader trying to seduce Luke to the dark side in Empire and her saying no, and that sort of creating all their animosity. Obviously that leads, right, you know, to the big Finn and Captain Phasma fight and BB-8 driving a Scout Walker, which was pretty cool. Like BB-8 overall in this movie I thought was great. Like I enjoyed him in The Force Awakens, I enjoyed him again in this. If there's one thing I found in this is maybe I could have done with some more Chewbacca. He's not in it heaps, and I really would have liked to see some more angry Chewbacca, or even an opportunity for him to, like, you know, have another go at Kylo Ren, because I feel out of everybody, Leia and Chewie lost the most when Han got killed, you know, and Chewie was pretty chill, you know. He was a little sad, obviously, when he told Luke that Han had died, but for the rest of it, he was pretty typically Chewie. Obviously, a lot of people have also had issue with the Porgs and how much they were in it and all their cutesy stuff. Again, watching that with my kid and my wife, like my daughter just adores those things, and, you know, she's 13, she's not like little, but she loved the Porgs, she loved the crystal dog things, she, you know, obviously laughed at Luke drinking that green tit milk thing out of that monster down on the beach, and she was like, straight away when we got out, like, I liked all the creatures, like the creatures were cool. So again, these are kids' films. They're catering to kids, so deal with the porgs. They're not that bad. They're not as bad as Jar Jar. At least they don't really talk, and they did have a couple of funny moments in it. So I don't have that big issue with them yet. Maybe, in a year's time, I would have changed my mind on that. But, that was all fine. Obviously them, having the big battle on that ship, Phasma getting maybe killed in a very Boba Fett-esque falling into her death kind of thing. But, that battle was okay. But I just honestly find Finn a pretty useless character. He just doesn't really do anything for me. The comic relief from him is probably the worst comic relief in the two movies. And he just, in the grand scheme of things, these stories could exist without him, Obviously, he had his moment later, so we get to the very end planet, and it's very Empire Strikes Back with walkers, even though they're a new walker, and I kind of like their new walking on their knuckles kind of thing with more shielding down the arms and the gun on top of their head or coming out of their back and whatever, like they were a new evolution of the AT-ATs, which is very cool. I liked the, having the capital ship or Kylo Ren's ship above them, giving commands and watching it from a viewing platform. That was all really cool. I enjoyed that whole battle, I liked the shitty speeders they drove, posed foot obviously going through one, and it was cool with the red shit getting kicked up off the grounds. I thought that was all cool, as reminiscent as it was as that same battle sequence from Empire Strikes Back. But it was interesting. Obviously it gets out of hand and everything's going bad, and then we've got, the Falcons showing up in some brilliant Millennium Falcon action with Chewie and Rey, taking out heaps of TIE fighters and going on a big chase through an underground thing. That was all brilliant. I really, really liked all that. Obviously that ending with Luke showing up, I really enjoyed, that's probably the only reason I thought it was worth keeping Leia around, was the reunion with her and Luke, and how, Luke came to her and had his little wink at C-3PO and gave her the dice he took from the Millennium Falcon, and kind of re-inspired hope in the people who were in that room. Obviously him going out and standing, obviously how that scene panned out, but during the time when he was standing in front of those walkers and they were pummeling him with fire, and Kylo Ren screaming from the capital ship to take him out, and the smoke clears or the red dust clears, and he's still there. I didn't ever contemplate the way that was going to pan out, and I found it really interesting. Kylo coming down, the confrontation, the banter between them, I liked all that. That was fine, Obviously coming down to the reveal where Luke wasn't actually there and he was using the Force from his island, and it was a projection of himself, and that was great storytelling. I really enjoyed it. Overall, I love Mark Hamill anyway, but I think this was his best performance as Luke Skywalker in the entire saga. I thought he had a really wide range of material to work with through this. He wasn't typically Luke. He wasn't typically crazy Yoda. I forgot to address the Yoda sequence that took place on Luke's island. Ironically, when Yoda first showed up and there was a long full body shot of him, I was like, damn, that Yoda looks shittier than the CG one they did last time, but then revealing that it was a puppet, and all the scenes with the close-ups and him engaging with Luke, they were great. His laugh and how crazy he was acting and all without going too over the top was fantastic. His dialogue with Luke was fantastic. His, re-inspiring Luke to be a Jedi Master and teach again and stuff was cool. The whole Yoda sequence really worked for me, and I love that they went down the path of having the puppet again. That was cool. So, Luke's sacrifice and, showing up there to save all of them and give them a chance to get out was cool. Obviously Rey, using the Force to save them all escaping. That was all brilliant, I really liked that. So when I look at it as a whole, if out of a 2 hour, 37 minutes or something that it is, if I'm a bit sketchy about 20 minutes of it, which is broken into just minute chunks here and there because of a sequence that I really hated the first time, didn't hate so much the second time, I have no idea how I feel about it again later, I feel better about it now. I don't yet think I'm ready to put it in this is where it sits in my listing of the saga for me. No matter whatever comes out from this point on, episode 4 and 5 will always be my favorite. Episode 5 was always going to be my favorite movie, episode 4 slightly after that, but after that, every other Star Wars movie has moments that I don't like, not just these new ones, so I don't want to be too critical. I'm happy that they're still making movies that I'm enjoying. I might feel differently if they make one that I actually hate or that actually hurts the franchise, but I truly believe they've yet to do that yet. I'd like to see how Rian Johnson will go with this new trilogy that he's been given to write by Disney. I like the fact that he played the game well and has gotten more opportunities from Lucasfilm to do more, unlike the two dudes who got fired off Han Solo and the idiot who got fired off of episode 9 coming up. If you're the people who get fired by Disney and you get fired, Lucasfilm and whatever, what do you think's going to happen with your career now when after them buying 20th Century Fox recently, they own such a huge monopoly of the Hollywood like mass movie market? So I'm glad for this guy. Even the guy who did Rogue One played well. They wanted reshoots. He did it. He agreed with them. You know, he played the game and he came out smelling apples, you know, at the end, which is great. So yeah, look, I like the movie. I really do. I'm not willing to say it's as good as anything yet or worse than anything. It's definitely better than Attack of the Clones, no matter what. It's probably better than the 3 prequel movies, I feel. But I'm not ready to say. But that's pretty much all I can think of in it right now. Bad casino thing. Shouldn't have ripped off the dog from The Last Guardian. Finn's still a useless character. I did end up liking Rose, and I did like Finn. I would have preferred if Finn had died with his sacrifice flying into that engine at the end, you know, but obviously with the love interest thing going on with Rose now, like, sure, let's see where it goes from there. See if we can get past him trying to be a coward and running off and doing something every movie now, and maybe tone down his humor thing a little bit, and who knows, maybe I'll like him. For me, the star was probably Poe Dameron. He was fantastic. I loved his character arc. I love how they took him from a gung-ho guy to a true leader, and I'm interested to see where he's going to go from that as a character. I'm still happy with Rey. I'm still happy with Kylo Ren. I'm still happy that Hux is around. I like that Kylo Ren taking over that role now. You know, that has to be the bad guy from this point on unless they're going to introduce someone new in the next movie. I'm really happy to see where it's going to go. I don't hate it as much as a lot of you out there. I just really think that, you know, we just all need to remember that even though the majority of us hardcore Star Wars fans are adults, these are still kids' movies. And for kids' movies, they're still ticking a lot of boxes for us. And I feel grateful for that. So who knows how my opinion will be of this later on. I think that's all I really wanted to talk about for it. So thanks for indulging me. As always, thanks for watching this channel. Please subscribe to it if you haven't. And I'll be back to review something else soon. Cheers.